we got them better rates on their key person policy, several of them came to us and said, you know what, we want you to help us with our personal life insurance, or we have some long-term care needs that we want you to kind of look at.
Because the more that we elevate the experience, the more the client will feel appreciated, personally valued, and become a stronger advocate.
It's important for us to have those conversations and get awareness out there, because if you don't, then you're not properly serving your clients' needs and their families.
Hey everybody, this is Morgan from TBA, and you're listening to the Life Insurance Link Up podcast, the show that provides real experiences from real advisors and industry leaders, as well as tips, tricks, and industry insights for advisors who care about growing themselves professionally and providing the best solutions for their clients. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Life Insurance Link Up podcast. This is Morgan. Today we have Carlan Snipes with Pack Life. Carlan, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Morgan.
And today we're going to talk about something that's probably top of mind or something you've encountered in the last couple years as the legalization of marijuana has become more and more common. And this is a question I know we get a lot in our office with our impaired risk cases, especially to Jennifer who handles those. So Pack Life is one of Jennifer's preferred carriers in scenarios like this, which is why we have Carlan on with us today. Carlan, if you're good with it, I'm going to jump right into some of these questions.
Perfect.
As marijuana becomes legalized, as I mentioned, in several states in the United States, how does Pack Life approach underwriting for those that use it?
Well, the good news is that since it's become legalized, marijuana users can now be considered for a non-smoker, whereas in the past, especially for Pacific Life, we would look at a marijuana user as a smoker. And the way we look at it now, because it is legalized in several states today and more forthcoming, assuming they meet certain criteria like age and the frequency of usage, they can qualify for some of our best rate classes. But the key, I'll tell you this, the key to marijuana use is that they have to be completely honest and upfront, because if during underwriting we find out they are using marijuana and they didn't disclose it, that's going to come across negative in their offer, because the underwriter is going to assume at that point, well, what else are they not telling me?
Honesty is the best policy.
Upfront, totally, yes.
Along those same lines, what are the marijuana use parameters that would get an insured a favorable rating? What would be their experience when going through underwriting?
Well, so for preferred best, which is our best rate class, they could not use in the past 5 years. So it would have to be someone that no longer used marijuana to get preferred best with us. You can get standard or better if they're an infrequent user of marijuana. If they have a positive THC, standard no nicotine is going to be the best offer they can get. So if in their lab work, even though they disclosed it, if in their lab work we see they're positive for THC, then they're going to get standard no nicotine at the very best. Again, like I mentioned earlier, if they do not admit it and we get a positive THC rating, that's going to be a decline. That's going to be an automatic decline. One of the things to think about is if a client is using over 8 times a month or 3 times per week, they would get tobacco user rates if they're using it that frequency.
When it comes to marijuana use, I know you mentioned THC. Are edibles treated differently in underwriting, or are all forms of marijuana use underwritten the same?
They are different, and recently we're seeing an increase in cases that are involving questions around CBD oil and edibles. And we don't really have any published guidelines out there, but let me give you some feel about how it works. So some CBD products do have THC. Often these products are found in cannabis stores. Those types of products would be considered the same as marijuana. So those guidelines that I just told you about, they would be looked at the same. However, they would be considered a non-nicotine user because they're not inhaling this. They're doing a gummy or they're doing a CBD oil. So they wouldn't be considered a nicotine user. But everything else would be the same that I mentioned earlier. Now, if it's less than 0.3%, that would not be considered as marijuana. So if that CBD has 0.3% or less THC in it, they would not be considered as marijuana. And those types of products, usually you're getting over-the-counter type of products with that. Another thing to keep in mind is if the client is using edibles, say 3 to 4 times a month recreationally, the best they'll be able to get is between preferred and standard, and they're really going to be borderline preferred at that amount of frequency.
Okay. What are the differences in underwriting for medical marijuana, since it's legal in 48 states versus states where recreational marijuana is now legal?
So the above guidelines I mentioned would apply just the same for medical marijuana as well as, recreational marijuana. The key with medical marijuana, what the underwriter is going to get into with that, is they're going to want to know why they need it. What's the underlying cause for them needing the medical marijuana? So what are they using it for? So that's going to be more important to them than the medical marijuana usage. But again, it's going to go back to the same criteria we just talked about for recreational. We're going to use that same type of underwriting criteria.
And with the legalization, the increases in dispensaries, how do you underwrite the owners of those dispensaries? Is that handled differently?
It is. And this is a tricky thing. So, state by state, it's becoming legal. But unfortunately, at the federal level, it's not considered a legal substance. So federally, the way we look at it, if you own, let's say, a medical dispensary, or if you work for someone that owns a medical dispensary, if you're making income off medical marijuana or marijuana dispensaries, we will not be able to consider you for underwriting. We won't even be able to look at you because federally, our life insurance policy, we want to make sure it's going to meet the guidelines, and federally it's not considered legal today. So it is a little different if it's around a dispensary or anybody that works for one or owns one. I actually had a case, last year I want to say, and the guy had owned a dispensary in Las Vegas, and he sold it right before he applied for the coverage. So he was good to go because he no longer had ownership in the dispensary.
Well, that's good to know. Well, Carlan, thank you so much. This information was super helpful, and honestly, I learned something today, so that's always good. So hopefully our listeners will learn something as well. We really appreciate you taking the time to hop on and provide some insight into this underwriting category.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time today. Please reach out to me, and anything I can help you guys with, I'll be happy to do it with Pacific Life Term as GUL product.
Great. Thanks everybody for listening today. We hope you learned something. Thanks for listening. You can find all the information mentioned in this episode, as well as other valuable resources, at TBA.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and while you're there, feel free to leave us a rating and let us know what you think.